I've never told anyone this before, but I invented punk. I invented it in my head one night towards the end of May 1975 when I was watching Led Zeppelin in Earl's Court, London. I'd been going to see bands for 3 years, and in those 3 years rock music had pigged out on its own self-importance and become a beast. The shows were longer and bigger and more expensive, and if you found yourself watching the drummer, it was because everyone else had left the stage so that he could play his interminable solo. You could never do that with John Bonham. In 1975, my favourite live band was Dr. Feelgood, who dressed in suits and played 3-minute R&B songs in clubs, but I'd never seen Led Zeppelin, an early teenage fixation, and they hadn't played in London for a while. 8 of us went, and within 45 minutes of Zeppelin taking the stage, 6 of us were in the nearest pub. Even if you made it through John Bonham's 20-minute drum solo in Moby Dick, you still had to face the quarter-of-an-hour John Paul Jones was given every night to noodle around on his organ in no quarter. That just left the 25-minute version of Dazed and Confused featuring Jimmy Page playing the guitar with a violin bow. Luckily for us, Zeppelin grouped all the solos together into one indigestible hour-long lump. You could play 3 games of pool and still be back in time for a Whole Lotta Love. What had happened to my music? If I wanted to be bored stupid by people waving violin bows around, I could have gone to the Royal Albert Hall, where they bored people stupid in precisely that way every night of the week and chucked a symphony in for free. The whole point of rock and roll was that it had been invented for people like me with no attention span and a primitive desire for speed, volume and as few chords as possible. Now my guitar heroes were becoming as monotonous and as self-absorbed as my school teachers, and I was restless and fidgety in the back row. Punk was coming, you could feel it. I was 19 in 1976 when the Sex Pistols made their first single. Up until that point, I'd been too young for everything. The 60s went right over my head, and I'd spent the early 70s not being served a drink and leaving shows early because I had last buses and trains to catch. Now, finally, I was at the right age, at the right time, but, wouldn't you know it, I was in the wrong place. I was an English literature student at Cambridge University, and if punk was about urban despair and glue sniffing and the doll and social revolution, well, I was going to have to sit it out. I had a full grant, and no one made me do anything ever, and I was living in one of the most beautiful educational establishments in the world. A few people at college dyed their hair and formed bands, but they looked pretty stupid. What were they angry about? Lectures? They didn't have to go to them if they didn't want to. The mess in their rooms, a maid would be in to clear it up in the morning. Really, we had maids and the government paid for them. They didn't come at weekends though. Maybe we could write a punk song about that. Because it could be a real drag. I knew whose side I was on. I was for 3 chords and 3-minute singles, and I was against violin bows and progressive rock triple albums and flared trousers. But how could I prove it? I bought the records and annoyed my neighbours with them. The Clash came to Cambridge and I went to see them. Under the stage lights, the sheets of sputum and phlegm looked oddly beautiful, like sprinklers in a football stadium before a night game. When the Clash played an anti-Nazi League rally in London, my friends and I marched through the East End to Hackney, and the police protected us from the snarling middle-aged skinheads wearing Union Jack t-shirts. For an afternoon it all felt real, but then we were back on the train to university, where Nazis were much harder to find. I would have paid good money out of my grant for a little authenticity and credibility, but no one was selling and I didn't know how to buy it anyway. Did it come in bags, pints? I didn't know that I was acting out one of punk rock's most pointless conversations with itself. Who was the punkist and what did that mean anyway? Johnny Rotten grew up in the mean streets of Finsbury Park, so he was okay. His credentials were impeccable. But Paul Simonon, the Clash's bass player, was rumoured to have gone to a posh school, and his dad was an art teacher. Shane McGowan, the punk who either bit someone's ear off or had his ear bitten off, I can't remember now, at a punk show, he went to a posh school too. The Stranglers were university graduates. One of them had a fucking PhD. But you could kind of tell that from the organ sound that dominated their records. Proper punks had no time for keyboards. This was the sort of thing we worried about, those of us who weren't Joe Strummer or Sid Vicious. They presumably didn't need to worry. Could you be a punk if you had hair like this, trousers like that, a guitarist who could play a keyboard? Could you be a punk, in fact, if you'd ever read a book? When London Calling came out, it answered all of these questions and more. London Calling showed evidence of book reading. There were songs about Montgomery Clift and the Spanish Civil War that must have come from some kind of research. There were pianos and organs and a horn section, and there were guitar solos. It was, in short, a rock and roll record. I saw them 4 or 5 times altogether, and the last time they seemed genuinely furious. Not because they were punks, and punks were always furious, but because they were trapped inside the cartoon that punk had become, and that they had helped to draw. They were playing in Ipswich, and all the farmers' sons had come for the kind of riot they'd been reading about in the papers. I was in the 9th or 10th row, but within seconds the 10th row was the front row because the other 9 had been destroyed. 2 years on, that whole spitting thing seemed a lot less romantic than it had done. It certainly must have lost its appeal for the band, who'd been swallowing other people's mucus for 3 years by then. And the angrier the band got, the more the crowd loved it, because being angry was what punk was all about. It was a great show, but it was sad too. They'd outgrown their audience. On the cover of London Calling, there's a photo of Paul Simonon smashing up his bass, but the lettering on the sleeve was stolen from Elvis Presley. No Elvis, Beatles or the Rolling Stones in 1977, Joe Strummer had sung 2 years before, but the Clash had worked out that if you didn't know your history, you wouldn't have a future. Elvis, Beatles and the Rolling Stones turned out to be their peers, not their enemies, but most of their fans were too busy spitting at them to notice. The Clash were too big for punk, but then everyone who has talent is too big for anything that tries to hold them back.
Damn right, Nick. 1, 2, 3, 4.
I'm So we all took a vote on stage, and it turned out I lost the rocking battle. So I'm going to read one more essay, and then the band are going to take over.